I had been married to Tom for 10 years. We had a home, stability, and a little daughter who believed her dad was the best man in the world. I thought our marriage was strong. Until one day Tom forgot his phone at home. I only wanted to bring it to him at work. Just a normal day, a normal university office. But when I opened the door, I saw his young secretary Anna sitting in my husband's chair. Her legs were resting on his desk, a glass of whiskey in her hand. And Tom was sitting beside her, without his jacket, looking at her the way he once looked at me. In that moment my whole world turned black and white. I threw his phone on the desk, and realized something terrifying. Sometimes the truth about the person you spent 10 years with reveals itself in a single second. But the most painful part wasn't what I saw. It was that Tom didn't even try to stop me.
Love Stories Max. Welcome to my channel. Enjoy watching, friends.
I trusted him for 10 years. Until I saw this. I remember that day down to the smallest detail. Sometimes I think that if I could turn time back just 5 minutes, I wouldn't have opened that door. I would have simply left the phone in my bag and driven home. And my heart would still be whole. My name is Joan. I had been Tom's wife for 10 years. 10 years of a life I once believed was the safest, most stable thing in the world. We had a daughter, Irene. She was 8. She laughed so loudly that sometimes even the neighbors laughed with her. She drew cats with wings and believed her dad was the smartest man on earth. And once, I believed that too. Our life was calm, quiet, comfortable. I didn't work. Tom always said there was no need. "Joan," he would say, loosening his tie after work, "you're doing the most important job. Taking care of our home, raising our daughter." And I believed him. My mornings began with the smell of coffee and toast. I packed Irene's school bag, braided her hair, and listened to her endless stories about classmates. Then I cleaned the house, cooked, sometimes watched old movies. Our house was cozy, big, peaceful, but in the evenings it became too quiet. Because Tom was almost always late. He worked as the rector of the local university, and he constantly complained about the job. Impossible schedule, he would sigh. Endless meetings, papers, faculty arguments. I listened, nodded, reheated dinner for the second time. Sometimes he came home at 10. Sometimes at 11. Sometimes later. And he had a secretary in his office. Anna. I had seen her a few times at university events. She was very beautiful. Young, slim, with long blonde hair and that kind of confidence that naturally draws people's eyes. She always smiled when she spoke to Tom. But she was married. Her husband's name was Nick. And that fact reassured me. Still, sometimes something inside me tightened. So I would invent small reasons to stop by Tom's office. Bring him lunch, sign some papers, drop off documents. I told myself it was just care and concern. But maybe, even then, I was already afraid. That day Tom forgot his phone at home. It was lying on the kitchen table next to his coffee cup. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I put it in my bag. "Mom, where are you going?" Irene asked. "To your dad. He forgot his phone." I even smiled. I didn't know that trip would break me. The university was almost empty. The hallways smelled like paper and old wood. I knew the way to his office very well. My heels clicked softly against the floor. The secretary's desk outside his office was empty. That surprised me a little. I knocked. No answer. So I opened the door. And suddenly the world became strangely quiet. Anna was sitting in Tom's chair. His chair. She was leaning back comfortably, as if she belonged there. Her long hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders. It was loose, slightly messy. Her legs were resting right on Tom's desk. On my husband's desk, she held a glass of whiskey in her hand. And Tom was sitting next to her. On the edge of the desk. Without his jacket, in a shirt with the top buttons undone. no tie. He also held a glass. They were talking and laughing. Quietly, casually. It looked far too relaxed. Far too close. Far too far from anything that resembled work. The room smelled of alcohol and expensive perfume. Then suddenly they saw me. Time seemed to stop. No one said a word. I looked at them, at her legs on the desk, at his shirt, at those glasses, and something inside me simply snapped. I slowly walked forward. I placed the phone on the desk. No, I didn't even place it. I threw it. It hit the wood with a dull sound. Now I understand everything, I said. My voice sounded strangely quiet. Anna quickly lowered her legs from the desk. Tom just looked at me. Without emotion, without a word, and that was the worst part. I waited for at least one sentence. Joan, this isn't what you think. But he stayed silent. Sometimes silence screams louder than the truth. Tears began to fall on their own. I don't even remember how I ran out of that office. The hallway blurred before my eyes. People looked at me. I didn't care. My world suddenly turned black and white, as if someone had switched off all the colors. I drove home gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers turned white. 10 years. 10 years of life. And this is how it ends. One office, 2 glasses of whiskey, and another woman sitting in his chair. Tom didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't come after me. That night I was sitting in the kitchen when he came home. It was almost midnight. He walked in calmly, just like always, as if nothing had happened. You're still awake? He said. That was all. I looked at him, waiting, for a word, for an explanation, for a lie, even. But he simply walked past me, took off his watch, and went to the bedroom. A few minutes later I heard him lie down. And that was it. No conversation, no apology, not even an attempt. In the morning he behaved as if nothing had happened. He drank coffee, read the news, kissed Irene on the forehead before school, and then told me, I'll be late today, as if my heart wasn't lying shattered right there on the kitchen table. And the worst part wasn't even what I saw. It was that he let me paint the rest of the story inside my own head. Sometimes a man's silence hurts more than betrayal itself. Because in that silence there isn't even respect for your pain. Only coldness and emptiness. I sat in the kitchen after he left, staring out the window, thinking only one thing. How is it possible to live 10 years with someone, and suddenly realize you never truly knew them at all? A week passed. An entire week in which I didn't say a single word to Tom. Our house was quiet, but the silence was no longer comforting. It felt heavy, cold, almost suffocating. Everything had turned black and white. Tom kept coming home late, just like before. Sometimes even later. He behaved calmly, normally, as if nothing had happened between us. And I kept looking at Irene, our little girl with big, curious eyes. She sat at the kitchen table drawing with colored pencils. In her world everything was bright, pink houses, blue skies, green trees. But my world had turned gray. And I didn't know what to do. Should I close my eyes? Pretend we were the perfect family? Cook dinner, smile, attend Irene's school events together, and act like my husband wasn't holding another woman's hand? Or should I gather the last pieces of my dignity and leave? End our marriage. 10 years of life. Forever. Time pressed on me like a heavy stone on my chest. I knew I had to make a decision. And at that exact moment, my phone rang. An unknown number. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. Hello? There was a pause on the other end. A quiet, hesitant male voice. Joan, he said. This is Nick, Anna's husband. My heart tightened instantly. I think we should talk, he said quietly. Maybe we could meet tonight? In the park downtown. At 6. After my shift. I don't know why I agreed. Maybe because by that point, I was too tired to be afraid. That evening the park was calm. The air smelled like early spring and damp earth. I was sitting on a bench when I saw him walking toward me along the path. Nick was nothing like Tom. He looked simple. Regular jeans, a dark jacket, work boots. He smelled faintly of paint and solvent. His hands had small smudges of paint on them, his nails dark from work. Nick was an auto body painter. But when he lifted his eyes, I noticed how warm they were, and how gentle his voice sounded. He sat down beside me. For a long moment we said nothing. Then he quietly said, "I know about Tom and Anna." The words dropped between us like a stone in water. And he began to tell me everything. How it started. How Anna began coming home later and later. How she started hiding her phone. How she stopped looking him in the eyes. Every word confirmed what I had been afraid of. My suspicions were true. We slowly walked through the park paths. Two people with broken hearts. Then suddenly Nick said softly, "Do you want to see them?" I stopped walking. What? They're probably having dinner right now. There's a restaurant not far from here. They go there a lot. My heart began to pound. We walked toward the restaurant. It had a large panoramic window. And through the glass, I saw them. Tom and Anna. They were sitting across from each other. There was a bottle of wine on the table, 2 glasses, a candle. Anna was smiling, and Tom was holding her hand. So casually, so naturally, as if that was their life. "They come here a lot," Nick said quietly. My vision blurred. I took a step toward the door. I wanted to go inside. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash that wine glass. I wanted them to look me in the eyes. But Nick gently caught my hand. "Don't," he said softly. I turned to him, tears streaming down my face. "Why?" He looked at the restaurant through the window. And answered calmly, "It won't solve anything." I stayed silent. "If they love each other," he continued quietly, "no matter how loudly you scream, it won't change anything." There was no anger in his voice. Only sadness. Only exhaustion. I started crying. The tears ran down my cheeks, and I didn't even try to wipe them away. Then Nick simply pulled me into a gentle hug. Carefully. His jacket smelled like paint, metal, and the cold evening air. "Sometimes," he said softly, "you just have to let people go." And in that moment, I realized he was right. The next day, I filed for divorce. My heart was broken. But for the first time in a week, I felt like I could breathe again. Several months passed after the divorce. Life slowly began to rebuild itself. Not as big, not as perfect as before, but it was mine. I was renting a small apartment on the 2nd floor of an old building. The windows looked out onto a courtyard where an old chestnut tree grew. In the spring it bloomed with white candles, and Irene liked to say it looked like an ice cream tree. Our apartment didn't have much furniture, but it had warmth. I was raising Irene on my own. We made breakfast together, cleaned together, laughed at silly movies in the evenings. Tom called sometimes. Rarely. "How's Irene?" he would ask shortly. And even more rarely he took her for the weekend. Every time the door closed behind them, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief and sadness. I no longer cried over Tom. The pain had faded. All that remained was a quiet emptiness, and a new life I was learning to build. One day after work I stopped by the supermarket. I was standing near the fruit section choosing apples for Irene when suddenly I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Joan?" I turned around. Nick was standing there. At first I barely recognized him. He looked different. He wore a clean dark shirt and jeans. His hair was a little longer than I remembered. But his eyes were the same. Warm. A little shy. "Hi," he said with a small smile. "I wasn't sure it was you." I smiled too. For a moment there was silence between us, but it wasn't painful anymore. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm good," I said. "Really, good now?" He nodded as if he understood more than I had said. Then he rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly and said, "Maybe we could have dinner together? If you're not busy." I was surprised, but there was no fear inside me anymore. I was a free woman. "Okay," I said softly. He looked almost surprised that I agreed. We decided to meet that evening. When I arrived at a small cozy cafe downtown, Nick was already waiting. And again I was surprised. He was wearing a suit. Not something expensive or fancy. Just a neat dark suit with a white shirt. And in his hands he held a small bouquet of flowers. When he saw me, his eyes lit up. "These are, for you," he said a little shyly as he handed them to me. Small wildflowers. Simple, and somehow they made my heart tighten. We sat near the window. We talked about simple things, work, Irene, life. His voice was soft and warm. And sitting next to him, I felt a strange calm. Like I didn't have to be strong anymore. When we left the cafe, the evening air was warm. Street lights filled the street with soft golden light. We stood there for a moment in a shy silence. Then Nick said quietly, "Joan, I'm really glad I ran into you again." I looked up at him. His eyes were so sincere, it took my breath away. He gently touched my hand. And I didn't pull it away. He leaned closer, very slowly, as if he was afraid of scaring me. And when his lips touched mine, it wasn't like the passionate kisses you see in movies. It was gentle, warm, real, like two broken hearts finally finding a quiet place to rest. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt hope. Sometimes life doesn't give us fairy tale princes. Sometimes it simply sends us someone with warm eyes, who arrives exactly when we almost stopped believing in new beginnings. And from that simple evening, our new story began. A year passed. Sometimes I think about the day my heart broke. Back then, it felt like my life was over. But now I know, sometimes something has to break, to make space for something real. Our wedding was small, very small, no grand hall, no hundreds of guests, no loud music. Just a few close friends, a quiet garden outside the city, and a warm summer evening. I wore a simple white dress. Irene kept spinning around me, fixing my veil and whispering softly, "Mom, you're the most beautiful." Nick stood a little to the side, slightly nervous. He was wearing a dark suit he bought especially for that day. His hands were clean, but I knew that just that morning they smelled like paint. He looked at me with those warm eyes of his, and there was so much tenderness in them, that my heart quietly tightened with happiness. When we said, "I do," Irene was the first one to start clapping. She laughed so loudly that everyone else started laughing too. That evening we moved into Nick's house. It was small, old, but incredibly warm. There was a tiny kitchen with a wooden table Nick had built with his own hands. A living room with a soft couch where we watched movies in the evenings. And a small backyard where Irene already dreamed about putting up a swing. The house wasn't luxurious, but it was real. Irene grew to love Nick very quickly. At first she was a little shy. But one day I heard her call from her room. "Nick, come look what I drew." And in that, Nick, there was so much trust. They fixed her bicycle together. Ate ice cream in the kitchen. Laughed about silly things. Sometimes I watched them and felt my heart slowly fill with warmth. Nick never tried to replace her father. He simply stayed, and that was enough. Sometimes in the evening he came home from work. I heard the door open. And with him came that familiar smell, paint and solvent. Once I thought that smell was rough. But now, it had become something familiar. Honest, warm, loved. Because that smell meant Nick was home. With us. One evening we were sitting on the porch. Irene was already asleep. Nick gently wrapped his arm around my shoulders. I rested my head on his shoulder. And looked at the quiet yard, the warm lights glowing in the windows of our home. And suddenly I realized something simple. Happiness doesn't always look the way you imagined it would. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the form of a small house, warm eyes, and a person who simply stays beside you forever. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss new stories. And also write in the comments how you liked this story on a scale of 1 to 5. Watch the following video and enjoy watching.